The Marvel Cinematic Universe has become a worldwide sensation since it took over Hollywood with the release of Iron Man in 2008. With 19 Marvel movies already out there and a reported 13 more in development, it seems like this mega franchise is almost unstoppable. But even movies that are packed with stars and helmed by some of the biggest directors working today aren't safe from a few scenes getting left on the cutting room floor. If you enjoy this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when we upload fresh content.
Alright, hey. Alright, good job, guys. Let's just not come in tomorrow.
Most consider Iron Man as the movie that started it all. The Robert Downey Jr.-led sensation awakened fans and studios alike to the possibilities of what these movies could be. With barely any script, it was also almost entirely improvised, so it makes sense that not everything would end up in the final cut. For instance, one deleted scene shows Tony and Yinsen still held in captivity. To bide their time, they play a game of backgammon and spar for intellectual superiority. The conversation remained in the movie, but the backgammon game was removed, probably because it made their situation look a little too relaxed. Another Iron Man cut takes place before Tony reveals to the world that he is actually Iron Man. Because he needs to travel to the Middle East to save a village from terrorists, he plans an elaborate party in Dubai and makes his exit during the fireworks. This was cut for continuity, seeing as how the suit can fly. It makes the whole thing a classic Tony Stark move, but a little unnecessary. In the second Iron Man, we have an extended scene in which Pepper Potts spots Agent Phil Coulson during the Senate committee sequence. During Sam Rockwell's speech, first Tony and then Phil recommend the same hot dog place to Pepper, Ben's Chili Bowl. While a chili dog sounds delicious and it makes for a funny bit, we're guessing this was shortened for time. In Iron Man 3, we have a scene where Harley's bully EJ sees Tony at his worst and then snowmobiles away laughing. Later in a life-threatening situation, Tony goes out of his way to rescue EJ, further proving that he is a hero. Iron Man 3 was already over 2 hours long, and only essential scenes that drove the plot forward were kept in out of necessity. After Maya Hansen is shot, she crawls too close to a volatile Extremis plant in an attempt to forward vital information about Extremis to Tony before the plant explodes, taking her with it. While a selfless sacrifice, ultimately this scene proves unnecessary. Moving on to the Incredible Hulk. In an alternate opening scene, we see Bruce Banner high up in the snow-covered mountain range. Out of hope of ever freeing himself from the Hulk, he takes out a gun and attempts to end his life. Fortunately, the Hulk intervenes. It's assumed this scene was just too depressing for the opening of the film, as it was geared at families after all. Another one from the same film involves a scene where Bruce has to deliver some pizzas to a couple of different groups of college students. The first is a group of mathematicians, and the second involves a run-in with a couple of sorority girls, who give Bruce the chance to say his classic line. We're not sure why this one was cut, but it probably wouldn't have added much to the final film. When Thor opened in theaters, audiences couldn't get enough of the moment in which he throws down his coffee mug and shouts, "Another." While in this scene, we see him do almost the same thing. He smashes a wine glass into a fire and calls for another before we see Thor and Loki as adults for the first time, and they have a little back and forth. While it's a nice introduction, we get the same amount of context from the scene that was chosen for the final version. Later in the movie on Earth, when a building has been blown up and Selvig dangerously injured, Thor saves his life using Asgardian technology. It's a heartwarming scene that shows how noble Thor actually is, but ultimately probably didn't work in the movie's flow of action. Thor also had an alternate ending which attempted to wrap up the characters neatly. We see Selvig back in the lab, and there is a hint at his use of some sword data as well as S.H.I.E.L.D.'s records. We also see Jane and Darcy start up a beacon that they hope will help Thor find them again. While S.W.O.R.D. would have thrilled hardcore comic fans, the ending they chose does a better job at setting up Thor 2, which was definitely a priority for the studio. In Thor: The Dark World, a scene was cut that showed Thor's mother talking to Loki, and a following conversation in which she expresses compassion for her wayward son as any mother would. She loves him despite his evil behavior, and it's a beautiful scene for both of them. It's a bit mysterious as to why this one was cut. It would have added some nice character dimension to both of them. This scene is one that's pretty much identical to the one that made it into the film, except instead of Loki actually turning into Captain America, giving Chris Evans a pretty awesome cameo, he simply takes on the outfit shield included, and tries his hand at an American accent. It definitely made sense for Chris Evans to end up in the final cut, but seeing Loki in the Captain's costume is pretty fun. The most recent and most beloved of the Thor movies was Thor Ragnarok, directed by Taika Waititi. In this deleted scene, Grandmaster sends Loki and Valkyrie to find Thor and the Hulk by waving them away with his hand. When they don't understand, a hilarious exchange between Grandmaster and Topaz about universal hand gestures follow. While it was probably cut for time, it is worth watching in its entirety. On their way to Asgard, Thor and Bruce Banner talk about the deaths of their fathers, over a bowl of what Bruce believes to be noodles. Thor laments about the loss of his hammer, which leads Bruce to compare the God of Thunder with the elephant Dumbo. Thor, of course, misunderstands, and it turns out that Bruce has been eating the very long tail of an extremely unappealing bug creature. Again, cut for time, but it is a scene that is beyond worth watching. In Captain America: The First Avenger, a scene was cut in which Steve Rogers decides that he has retired from the press circuit and has a medal given to him by Colonel Phillips, while Howard Stark shows some hesitance to believe the Captain about the Hydra explosive. All in all, the pace of the film was probably better off without this scene, and there was enough existing content to make up for it. In another scene, Steve is seen watching a documentary about himself, looking up at his old friends, and goes to visit a cafe in which he meets the waitress he will later save. While it would have made their future scene together more impactful and did include a Stan Lee cameo, like most of the other scenes, it was cut for time. In Captain America: The Winter Soldier, a scene was cut that showed S.H.I.E.L.D. turning on the Captain. They think, because of a tracker placed in his suit, that they have found him, but it turns out he had already rid himself of the uniform and is nowhere near it. While a nice victory for Steve Rogers, this scene didn't do much to push the story forward. The first Avengers film included quite a lot of deleted scenes, as it's rumored that Joss Whedon's first cut was over 3 hours long. In this one, we actually have two small Loki bits in one that ended up on the cutting room floor. Firstly is Loki communicating with the other and forming their evil plot, and the second part reveals that Loki has forgotten the scepter. When you have to cut over an hour from your movie, difficult choices have to be made.
Well, he's definitely unhappy. I'm gonna try and keep him that way.
In Avengers: Age of Ultron, an extended version of Thor's dreamlike vision exists, in which, according to Joss Whedon, we see Loki doing an impression of Odin, as well as Thor entering the Pond of Destiny in search of answers. He then becomes possessed by a character known as Norn. Whedon said that the reason it was cut is because the scene was not favored by the executives behind the film. Another cut from Age of Ultron apparently involved Quicksilver, according to Joss Whedon. Apparently it revolved around Quicksilver actually surviving the gunfire that did him in the end. They also originally shot a version of the ending with Quicksilver in it, proving that he did survive. They didn't end up using it, however, because Whedon found it unrealistic to make a film about a war with no casualties, no price to pay.
That dude there, I need his prosthetic leg.
His leg?
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy is similar to Deadpool in that the movie feels a little bit like a world of its own. It shook up the MCU a little upon its release. One thing that's missing, however, is more shared screen time between Gamora and Nebula, though that wasn't always the case. This deleted scene has the two sisters confront one another, discuss their family, and do a little fighting. Like most deleted Marvel scenes, it seems like this one was sacrificed for a 2-hour runtime. This short deleted scene between John C. Reilly's Roman Day and Peter Serafinovic's Denarian Saul was another moment of comedy in an already hilarious film. Day can't get his clothing to light up properly, and the two figure out where to send the Guardians. While it is funny, the overall edit doesn't suffer the loss of this scene.
Let's go!
Black Panther only had a couple of scenes that didn't make it to the final cut. In this one, T'Challa recalls when T'Chaka gave him the title of Black Panther while he was still king. Zuri tells him that the reason is because T'Chaka had become too fat to wear the suit. While it's a great moment between the two, it didn't really help in moving the story forward. Before T'Challa has to make his address to the United Nations, he meets Everett Ross. Everett asks T'Challa not to reveal the true wealth and power of Wakanda to the world, and T'Challa tells him that he won't allow fear to guide him anymore. Ross relents and attempts to wish T'Challa good luck in Wakandan, but accidentally wishes him good luck and many shoelaces instead.
Hey, could you hold this for a second? Thanks.
Hey, is this anybody's bike?
In Spider-Man Homecoming, a scene with Marissa Tomei as Aunt May was left on the cutting room floor, in which Aunt May ended up saving a little girl who was in distress, leaving us to wonder if Aunt May imparted her senses of ethics and selflessness onto her nephew. It added dimension to their relationship, and Tomei has come out to say that she was quite disappointed this great scene didn't make it into the final film.
In comics, there's always a great what-if story waiting to be told. That said, alternate universe storylines tend to serve as big multi-issue events. The movies of your favorite DC Comics characters also have some cutscenes that, if left in, would have changed our perceptions of the character. Here are 20 deleted scenes that would have given us an alternate version of DC movies. Suicide Squad was the first comic book movie to mash up all the bad guys into a singular fighting force. It was a shame much of the Joker's content ended up on the cutting room floor. In one scene, when an explosive didn't kill a security officer, the Joker decided to use his bare hands to neutralize the guard. Elsewhere, the Joker and Harley Quinn reveal they collect watches from their victims, showing us the full magnitude of the kill list, and making them just a little less sympathetic than they already weren't. Another DC Comics mainstay, Lois Lane, also got the short end of the trident in the DCEU. In Batman v Superman, she may have figured into some key action sequences, but her character happened to conveniently show up whenever she was needed. In Zack Snyder's original cut, Lois spends more time in Nairobi, and we actually get to see her meeting Jimmy Olsen, before the iconic character is quickly taken out. We get to see a bit of journalistic prowess when she maneuvers through her conversation with a Nairobi general. Plus, it's nice to see that Lois can take care of herself, before Superman comes to the rescue. In Suicide Squad, the Joker, always his own man and always full of surprises, was rumored to have a separate scene with the Enchantress. In this moment, one that didn't make the final cut of the film, the Joker reportedly met with the Enchantress and offered his services in exchange for being granted the role of Gotham's sovereign ruler. Showing some compassion for his on-again off-again girlfriend Harley Quinn, the Joker offered this deal to her. Surprisingly, Harley refused, feeling loyalty to the Suicide Squad. For an unstable villain like Harley, it was a level of empathy that may not have felt entirely in character. While it isn't part of the current DCEU continuity, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy remains a triumph of superhero filmmaking. That said, deleted scenes from Dark Knight Rises may have cleared up some plot holes from that installment, including Bane's backstory. Nolan obviously preferred to shroud the character in the shadows and limit his background to a couple of quick flashes. However, more flashbacks were filmed, including glimpses of earlier, more primitive versions of his mask, and footage of how he got his start with Ra's al Ghul's League of Shadows. Another recent but pre-DCEU film, Superman Returns, did decent at the box office, but has an incredibly divided reputation. One sequence that probably divided the creative team was Superman's return to Krypton. Kal-El left Earth for 5 years so he could return to his homeworld and confirm whether it was truly destroyed. In a crystalline spaceship, Superman came across the shards of Krypton, only to be subdued by the planet's now kryptonite debris. This is why, upon returning to Earth early in the theatrical cut of the film, he's in such a weakened state. Steppenwolf was the main baddie in Justice League, but he could have made his appearance in an earlier film. A deleted scene from Batman v Superman centers around Luthor and foreshadows the events to come. In the scene, commandos trot through a Kryptonian ship with guns drawn. They come upon an opening, and within the opening, they see Luthor facing an imposing figure, who we now know as Steppenwolf. This moment would have given us a teaser of Justice League's MacGuffin. Taking a break from the Snyderverse, let's dive backward to a simpler time, when villains were cartoony and the Dark Knight wasn't taken so seriously in Batman Forever. After the sequence where Two-Face and the Riddler's forces storm Wayne Manor, there once was a scene in which Bruce Wayne, shot during the altercation, forgets he's Batman. In a dreamlike state, Bruce imagines a life without Batman, and it takes a reminder from his loyal servant Alfred to bring Bruce back to reality. Once he's back in the Batcave, Wayne reads a diary. He also faces a giant imaginary bat before his amnesia fades and he can don the over-stylized batsuit once more. If Cyborg ever gets his own movie, maybe they can add this scene back in. Originally filmed for Justice League, this sequence followed Cyborg's pre-crime fighting life, before his father resurrected him Darth Vader style as a man and machine hybrid. In these short scenes, we would have witnessed Cyborg's early career as a talented football player. Although there wasn't much room for it in the finished film, its inclusion might have made us care more about the character. Batman may be the world's greatest detective, but Batman v Superman originally featured more of Superman doing his own research. Snooperman, as we're gonna call him this one time only, goes to Gotham under the guise of covering a football game as his journalist alter ego Clark Kent. While in Gotham, Kent learns about Batman's unmerciful vigilante streak from witnesses. This fires up Clark Kent/Superman and his need to bring Batman to justice. In The Dark Knight Rises, Matthew Modine lent his talents in the supporting role of Foley, Gordon's second-in-command. Foley was a foil for Batman and was built throughout the film as someone who ultimately grew to appreciate the need for Batman in the fight against Bane. Then he met an unceremonious end, appearing to die off-screen. In a deleted scene, however, Foley was to be run over by one of the repainted tumblers. While not necessarily as memorable a death as one would hope for, it at least shows him bravely standing in the way of those threatening the free people of Gotham. No one seems more aware of the negative reviews of 2011's Green Lantern than Ryan Reynolds. But we're all more than willing to give the Green Lantern another shot, and apparently so was the DCEU. In a deleted post-credits scene from Justice League, Tomar-Ray and Kilowog paid Batman a visit. Since Tomar-Ray and Kilowog are members of the Green Lantern Corps, these two characters set up the inclusion of that intergalactic force in future DCEU movies. Batman Returns is so incredibly over the top, and yet it's a perfect capper for Tim Burton's tenure as Bat director. Fortunately, there was one scene that Burton found to be too much and cut from the theatrical release of the film. In this version of Batman, the masked vigilante has enough of a cult following to warrant a gift shop full of Bat merchandise. However, an arcade game in the store, obviously a Batman arcade game from our own universe, includes a picture of Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne on the outside of the box. This would have stuck out like a sore thumb in the finished movie, since it would have indicated that some video game manufacturer knew of Batman's secret identity. The DCEU has been criticized for its dark and morose take on the Superman character. This deleted scene from Batman v Superman likely wouldn't have changed that perception. According to Zack Snyder, there was a filmed scene that showed Superman searching for Martha Kent. During his search, we, the audience, hear the cries for help coming from all over Metropolis. It's what Superman probably hears on a daily basis, but he needs to single out the voice of his adoptive mother in order to rescue her. The Mother Boxes were the MacGuffin of the Justice League movie, and while these artifacts may seem like standalone additions to DCEU lore, they were originally supposed to be introduced much sooner. The end of Wonder Woman was written to include a scene in which Etta Candy describes a mission to nab a priceless piece of history from deep within Europe. Illustrated on a piece of paper, we see Etta's talking about recovering a Mother Box. Superman 2 set the stage for how big-budget superhero action sequences were presented. In a cutscene, we would have seen more cinematic fireworks as the Kryptonian villains, Zod, Non, and Ursa, attempted to enter Superman's Fortress of Solitude. It shows us that the fortress doesn't have an open-door policy, and its Kryptonian defense system initially gives Zod an electric shock. It takes the combined strength of all three villains to break into Superman's North Pole home base. We know why Bruce Wayne is Batman, but do we know why Harley Quinn is a Batwoman? No, literally, why does she wield a bat in Suicide Squad? Well, according to a deleted scene, likely cut because of the Joker's brutality, the Clown Prince of Crime is shown escaping from Arkham Asylum with a baseball bat in hand. This same bat is the one Harley uses throughout the film's present-day sequences. With this in mind, we can assume that the bat is a token of the Joker and Harley Quinn's relationship. Superman 4 is rightfully considered one of the goofiest superhero stories ever put to film, but there were some potentially iconic moments that hit the cutting room floor. One of these includes Clark Kent's visit to the Smallville farm, now with a for sale sign by the front. He checks on the shell of his spaceship stored beneath the family farmhouse and meets with a realtor who seems to know the Kents from way back. It's a bit of nostalgia that elevates an otherwise clunky movie. Similar to how we never got to see more of Cyborg's backstory in Justice League, we also missed out on more of Barry Allen. In this deleted sequence, we would have seen the Flash use his finger to break through the window of a restaurant. Once outside, he rushes into an intersection and catches a woman thrown from her flipping car. The woman who he intercepts mid-air is revealed to be Iris West. Comic book fans may recognize the name as that of Barry Allen's wife. Surprise! Here's one more moment from Superman 4. This scene takes one of the few opportunities in the entire Christopher Reeve canon to show Superman in a state of absolute physical weakness. Superman suffers from radiation sickness after his encounter with Nuclear Man. Obviously, the Man of Steel recovers, but for this short scene, we're given a glimpse of what a sickly Clark Kent might look like. It's basically Christopher Reeve's interpretation of Death of Superman, where instead of Doomsday, Kal-El fights frail bones. In DC Comics, Darkseid is one of Superman's greatest foes and one of the biggest threats the world has ever seen. While no films have capitalized on his presence, we almost received an introduction to the character in Justice League. There, Steppenwolf would have been shown returning to Darkseid to atone for his botched mission. Darkseid then would have decimated Steppenwolf and revealed his plans to visit Earth himself.
The original Star Wars won the Academy Award for Best Editing for a good reason. It's one of the most tightly paced films of all time. Under George Lucas's direction and the Oscar-winning editor's Jedi-like instincts, they were able to cut any scene that made them say, "I have a bad feeling about this," ruthlessly building a film that moved faster than Anakin Skywalker's homemade pod racer. Now, The Last Jedi is available to be watched, loved, and hated within the comforts of our own homesteads. And with its 14 deleted scenes, The Last Jedi isn't the first Star Wars movie to lose some gems brighter than a Kyber crystal. So let's count down these top 10 deleted scenes that might have made the Star Wars movies even better than they already are. So keep watching this video, click on the red subscribe button, and together we can rule the galaxy.
Just stick close to Chewie and Lando. They're taking care of everything.
Oh, great.
Luke finishes his lightsaber. In the decades following the release of Return of the Jedi, there were many parts of the universe that were left to fans' imaginations. Before the prequels, no one knew what really went into training a Jedi Knight, except, of course, Vader's line,
"I see you have constructed a new lightsaber. Your skills are complete."
Well, this important step in Jedi training was actually originally included at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Taking place shortly after the opening crawl, our original introduction to the good guys was supposed to feature a hooded Luke putting the finishing touches on the hilt of his laser sword before inserting it into a hidden compartment in R2's dome. This all happens while Vader tries to reach Luke by saying his name over and over again in a creepy voice. Luke, Luke. While this sequence spoils the big reveal of Luke's lightsaber during the fight above the Sarlacc pit a little bit later in the movie, this is a nice personal moment and lends credence to the idea that Luke was the mastermind behind the plot to rescue Han Solo from Jabba's palace. Without this scene, the rescue seems a little more haphazard, with 3PO, R2, Leia, Chewie, and Luke each entering the palace at separate times and all getting captured. Some plan, Luke.
I tell you, this station will be operational as planned.
Jar Jar balks at Palpatine's command. Mos Eisley might be a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but it's got nothing on the cold, cold heart of the Emperor. In Return of the Jedi, that guy turns a tight ship and an even tighter Death Star.
The Emperor's coming here?
That is correct, Commander. And he is most displeased with your apparent lack of progress.
However, Moff Jerjerrod, the guy in charge of overseeing the construction of the second Death Star, shows some compassion when he balks at Emperor Palpatine's commands. While the Emperor is busy tempting Luke to the dark side in his throne room, he commands Jerjerrod to fire on the planet if the rebels manage to turn off the Death Star's shields. Jerjerrod objects, saying that their best troops are on the surface. Meanwhile, the stormtroopers on the planet aren't too great at their jobs. They get their cans handed to them by a bunch of uncivilized Furbies. Once the shield generator goes down, an entire sequence of scenes follows Jerjerrod and his command crew as he orders them to power up the Death Star's super laser. He ends up playing a similar role to Grand Moff Tarkin's at the end of A New Hope, right down to the fact that Jerjerrod blows up. But it's nice to see an Imperial commander with a conscience.
What good's all your uncle's work if the Empire takes it over? You know they've already started to nationalize commerce in the Central Systems?
Tosche Station. The way Luke whines to his aunt and uncle about not being able to go to Tosche Station to pick up some power converters, you'd think this place would have a cool band, or at least a couple of pinball machines. Instead, Tosche Station is just a thrift store populated by hipsters. Still, it's the perfect B-roll footage for any intergalactic TMZ looking to produce a Before They Were Stars segment about Luke Skywalker. But when a fellow filmmaker told George Lucas this scene was basically American graffiti in space, he cut it. Chronologically, this footage appears earlier in the movie, before Luke even meets R2 and 3PO. From the ground, using his binoculars, Luke witnesses Princess Leia's ship be overtaken by Vader's Star Destroyer. He heads over to his friends to report the battle happening in Tatooine's atmosphere, but gets laughed off, and they even call him Wormy for some reason. This moment gives us more backstory behind Luke's character. The fact his contemporaries don't take him seriously means we're rooting for him to succeed even more than before. Plus, Luke's bestie, Biggs, makes an appearance and confides that he's going to join the rebellion. This inspires Luke to consider becoming a rebel himself, and makes us care more about Biggs before he blows up in the Death Star trench later on. R.I.P. Biggs.
You're going to kill him, aren't you?
Padme fights back. Regardless of your thoughts on the prequels, Padme is written to be a strong and decisive character, until Revenge of the Sith happens. She lets Palpatine declare martial law without a fight. Then she dies of a broken heart. Sure, it's poetic, but she's just given birth to 2 future freedom fighters. For a selfless queen, it's one of the most selfish decisions a character could make. Also, it convolutes Leia's story in Return of the Jedi, where she remembers her mother. A feistier Padme would have been much more effective, and apparently, we could have gotten that. In the original cut of Revenge of the Sith, a series of scenes follows a small group of rogue senators, including Padme, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma. They saw Palpatine as a threat and planted the seeds for what would grow into the Rebel Alliance.
We have decided to do what we can to stop it. Senator Mon Mothma and I are putting together an organization.
Say no more, Senator, I understand. At this point, some things are better left unsaid.
Even more powerful is the revelation that Padme was originally going to try to kill Anakin when reuniting with him on Mustafar. A deleted concept by artist Ian McCaig had Padme pull a knife to Anakin's throat once she realized he was too far gone to the dark side. Ultimately, this sequence was never produced, but it would have been a much more powerful end for the mother of Princess Leia.
I like this thing.
Tunnel standoff. The Force Awakens may have suffered slightly from a storyline that too closely mirrored A New Hope, but it succeeds largely because it mirrors the charm in that original Star Wars movie too. Rey and Finn keep things upbeat throughout the film, but it's Harrison Ford's return that's a real standout. The scene in the tunnel underneath Maz Kanata's castle on Takodana features perhaps the most Han Solo-y moment in a very Han Solo-filled film, so it's too bad it didn't make the theatrical cut. When Kylo Ren's forces land on Maz's forest planet, they storm the castle and our heroes hear the approaching troops from their basement location. When they arrive, Han is able to stall them with quick-witted quips that harken back to that time in the Death Star detention center when he asks an operator,
"Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?"
The stormtroopers order them to surrender on behalf of Supreme Leader Snoke, but Han plays dumb, pretending he doesn't know a Snoke. When they ask him to put down the blaster in his holster, his response is, it's broken. Call us nostalgic, but The Force Awakens could have used just an extra scene full of that Solo snark. If only there was some other chance to see Solo on screen. Extended bunker attack. Due to the cost of stunts and effects, it's rare you'll see an action sequence end up on the cutting room floor, but the layered storylines in the third act of Return of the Jedi, with multiple set pieces occurring simultaneously, meant that something needed to be cut to avoid confusion. Unfortunately, Lucas was making a nature trumps machines statement with all the footage of Ewoks speeding up stormtroopers with their sticks, so instead, he ended up deleting some perfectly fine shots of the rebel ground troops fighting their way through the bunker on Endor that controlled the Death Star's shields. While it doesn't necessarily move the plot along and the spunky Ewoks do steal scenes set in their village, it's still hard to believe an entire legion of the Emperor's best troops could be defeated by a bunch of undomesticated Care Bears. There's also a lot of extra footage of Rebel pilots, including the appearance of Star Wars' first female flyer, whose voice was dubbed over by a man's for some reason. Plus, alternate takes of Admiral Akbar's scenes exist where the lines are delivered by General Crix Madine, in the event the Akbar costume failed to wow audiences. Too bad General Crix Madine didn't know he was going to be cut, and it was a trap!
You changed your hair.
Same jacket.
Leia reintroduction. In The Force Awakens, General Leia is supposed to be introduced much earlier. While that may have spoiled her grand entrance when she's reunited with Han outside the ruined castle on Takodana, earlier cuts of the movie would have had us checking in with the former princess throughout the first act. In a short exchange between Leia and a trusted Resistance officer, the general tells her officer to head to the Republic Senate to insist they take action against the First Order. Her emissary, Kor Sela, is actually the woman we see on the balcony later in the movie, watching Starkiller Base's death ray head her way, ultimately destroying the Republic's capital on the Hosnian system. It's Leia who sends Sela to the Republic in the first place. Sela asks if the Republic will listen, and Leia argues, not all senators think I'm insane. Or maybe they do. I don't care. It's a classic Carrie Fisher delivery and gives us some nice insight into the relationship between the Republic and the Resistance as separate but tenuously allied entities, an insight that we don't really get in the finished movie. Hoth Wampa Attack. Empire Strikes Back is a perfectly paced film, so why ruin a good thing? To add even more action into the opening of the film, that's why. Lucas, screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan, and director Irvin Kershner were worried that the build-up to the Battle of Hoth needed even more tension than it already had. They crafted a subplot involving a crew of Wampa snow creatures attacking the base. You know, the same Yetis that slapped Luke in the face and hung him out to dry at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the day, it deviates too much from the main plot, and the full body shots of the Wampas don't stand up to the rest of the movie's effects. Still, it's a cool what-if to realize that all those Wampas in the Echo Base level from the Shadows of the Empire video game were actually based on sequences cut from Episode 5.
No more training do you require. Already know you. That which you need.
Yoda and Obi-Wan's disagreement. On Yoda's deathbed in Return of the Jedi, the Old Master confirms for Luke that Vader is in fact his father. However, in a cut exchange, he goes on to reveal that Obi-Wan would have told you long ago had I let him. In Kenobi's explanation in the finished film, the Force Ghost tells Luke that Luke had been told the truth
from a certain point of view.
Yet this unspoken disagreement between the two Jedi Masters makes the two members of the Old Guard into much more complex characters. Throughout the Star Wars films, the Jedi tend to stick to their narrative as selfless individuals with unclouded minds. With this revelation that Yoda wanted to keep Luke's father's identity secret, it shows that the ancient teacher was a bit more conniving and manipulative than you'd think. It also gives more credence to Luke's philosophy in The Last Jedi, that the Jedi Order is an old way of thinking that needs to be replaced. This sequence is available on the Laserdisc release of Return of the Jedi. It doesn't include the rumored to be cut monologue from Kenobi's ghost, in which he talks about Luke's mother and explains in further detail the decision to hide the Skywalker twins on different planets. But it does contain 30 full minutes of Frank Oz working the Yoda puppet like a pro.
Trained as a Jedi, your request for him,
Finding him was the will of the Force. I've no doubt of that.
Qui-Gon and Yoda. And speaking of Yoda's secrets, after the dust has settled at the end of Revenge of the Sith, the little green Jedi confides to Obi-Wan Kenobi that he's heard from the latter's former master from beyond the grave. Yoda hints that deceased Master Qui-Gon Jinn will be able to teach Obi-Wan how to become one with the Force. You know, how to disappear, become a ghost, and haunt your ex-friend's kid. Their conversation ends with us assuming that Obi-Wan and Yoda learn from the ghost of Qui-Gon while they wait for Luke, the New Hope, to be ready to face Vader. Originally, we were supposed to actually witness Yoda and Qui-Gon's conversation firsthand. Around the time the twins were being born on the asteroid outpost of Polis Mesa, Qui-Gon's disembodied voice was to reach out to Yoda and explain it's possible to retain one's consciousness through the Force, even after physical death. George Lucas and prequel producer Rick McCallum had repeatedly stated that the prequels would reveal how Jedi were able to come back as see-through space therapists, but alas, no explanation ever came. This scene would have shed some light on it, but apparently Liam Neeson wasn't available to record his dialogue, and the whole scene was dropped like 2 proton torpedoes into a small thermal exhaust port.
Deleted scenes are always some of the most fun you'll find on the special features of your favorite film. Usually when a scene was cut, there was a good reason for it. Maybe it didn't add anything or it messed up the pacing. But sometimes there are scenes that we think definitely should have stayed in the final cut of the theatrical release, as they would have made things less confusing in the end. Before we get started though, be sure to click on the subscribe button if you haven't already to stay up to date with all the awesome content coming your way from Screen Rant. Also, can you guess the hit film based off of these emoji? Stay tuned for the answer.
You were not summoned here to grovel, Director Krennic.
No, it's...
There is no Death Star.
There's something about Vader. It seems like Star Wars is always in the headlines these days, with Disney revitalizing the franchise and giving us not only a new trilogy, but a new set of spin-off films. The Last Jedi is just around the corner and fans are getting hyped, so we decided to take a look back into the original trilogy. While there have already been plenty of alterations made to the original 3 films, we can definitely say that one scene definitely should have been added to the fold. You know, as opposed to that CGI Jabba scene in A New Hope. We're talking about a scene in Return of the Jedi, in which Yoda talks to Luke about Kenobi's secret concerning his father. In this extended scene, Yoda confirms to Luke that Vader is indeed his father. But there's also a new bit of information here that changes how we look at Kenobi, who always seemed to be something of a manipulator of the truth. Yoda tells Luke that Kenobi would have in fact told him the truth if Yoda allowed it. So if this was included in the final cut, Kenobi dancing around the truth would have been because he was on strict orders from his former master to not reveal anything due to Luke being emotionally unprepared.
You've declared war against the Federation. Withdraw. I'll agree to arrange a conference with Romulan leadership at a neutral location.
I do not speak for the Empire. We stand apart.
Nero's downtime. J.J. Abrams had the daunting task of making Star Trek fresh for a new generation, and we can all safely say he did that. The soft reboot of the franchise appealed to both Trekkies and newcomers alike, who took to Abrams' more kinetic approach to Star Trek. In the film, the big bad is played by Eric Bana, one of the few big-name actors attached to the project at the time. Bana played Nero, a Romulan captain from another timeline. He was sucked into a black hole alongside the original Spock and thrust into the new reboot timeline with Chris Pine as Kirk. When Spock went through the hole, however, it felt like moments for him, whereas Nero and his shipmates were stuck in limbo for over 20 years. So what did they get up to exactly for so long? As it turns out, the answer is pretty cool. Unlike Spock, who had it easy, the Romulan ship was eventually captured, which saw Nero and his crew enslaved by the Klingons. They worked in the mines for over 2 decades, over which Nero was formulating plans to free his people and escape the prison planet. The escape would have given Nero even more credibility and showcased how patient of a villain he could be.
What is this newfound love for the Frost Giants? You could have killed them all with your bare hands.
I've changed.
So have I.
Loki's plan. In contrast to Thor Ragnarok's fun and humorous tone, the first Thor movie was much more in the vein of a comic book Shakespeare film. It had a much more serious tone, which set the stage perfectly for intense family drama. When Frost Giants attack Asgard at the beginning of the film, Thor launches a covert mission to their homeworld to find some answers. Upon their return, however, they learn that Odin was made aware of their conquest thanks to a tip-off from one of the guards. It's pretty jarring to hear this information yet never see Loki talk to any guards. In a deleted scene, however, we see the team getting ready to head out to the Bifrost where Heimdall awaits. While the Gatekeeper's powers are being discussed, Loki slips away and reveals their mission to the guard in the background. It shows not only the missing piece of information, but that Loki doesn't even have to sneak around to get what he wants. The scene, however, features a set that felt very unlike Asgard, so maybe it was for the best that the scene was cut, aesthetically at least. We would have still preferred to have seen Loki conjure up his plan.
Ripley?
I don't want to hear about it, Bishop. She's alive. There's still time.
In 19 minutes, this area is going to be a cloud of vapor the size of Nebraska.
Hicks, don't let him leave.
We ain't going anywhere.
Ripley's past. James Cameron's Aliens film is a classic, there's no doubt about it. A more action-heavy sequel to Ridley Scott's horror masterpiece, Aliens sees Sigourney Weaver's Ripley return to the fold to deliver the pain to a whole pack of aliens this time, including the Queen. Ripley is one of cinema's most awesome action heroes. She isn't a warrior or a soldier, yet when thrown up against the odds, she muscles up and doesn't let anything go to chance, which is one of the common criticisms of the beloved film. She's essentially a robot with a one-track mind for taking out these alien scums. But Ripley has been in cryosleep for the better part of a century, meaning that everyone she'd once known is now dead, including her daughter. Yet, that doesn't seem to faze her much. In a deleted scene, however, we get to see Ripley's emotional side, showing the audience that she's much more human than we've been led to believe. She's informed of the passage of time and the fate of her daughter in a scene which causes her to eventually break down. Putting this scene in not only humanizes the alien hunter, but also explains her attachment to Newt later in the film.
Boromir.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing.
One does not simply delete. His online fame aside, Boromir can be seen as a rather one-dimensional character in the original cut of the Fellowship of the Ring. The son of Gondor goes from wanting to protect Frodo to lusting over the ring between scenes, and it seems like the ring is seriously corrupting this soldier. But a deleted scene, which was ultimately restored in the director's cut, should have been left in the theatrical cut. In The Two Towers, we meet Boromir's brother Faramir, who unlike his brother is treated like dirt by their father, the steward of Gondor. In a flashback scene, we see that the two brothers were in fact quite close, as they bask in celebration after winning a battle. While Boromir is regarded as a Middle-earth rock star, he makes sure not to forget his brother. While his father presents Boromir with affection, it shows how open his dislike for Faramir is, to the point where Boromir is actually put off by it. But one can't say no to their father. He orders Boromir to the Council of Elrond to get the ring and bring it to Gondor. With that in mind, Boromir's obsession with the ring takes on a whole new light, when we know Boromir was there on the orders of his father.
No man in the sky intervened when I was a boy to deliver me from Daddy's fists and abominations. I figured out way back. If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good.
Communion. When it first came out in cinemas, Batman v Superman was one heck of a divisive film. Critics panned it, and fans couldn't seem to agree if it was a masterpiece or a seriously flawed film. Things looked a bit brighter, however, when the Ultimate Director's Cut was released on Blu-ray. That extended the film's runtime and changed its rating. However, one scene definitely should have been part of the theatrical cut. That scene, of course, is the communion scene. Originally intended to be a post-credit scene, the Lex Luthor-centric moment was released online after the release of the film as to avoid any similarities with the MCU. But they should have just ended the film this way, as it directly sets up the Justice League film. One of the biggest points of criticism in the film was Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of Lex, who was perhaps a bit too eccentric for the big screen. But in this cut scene, we see the villainous lead actually communing with Steppenwolf, the confirmed villain in Justice League. Lex still has his hair here, so despite being saved as an after-credit scene, this actually takes place earlier in the timeline. Keeping this would make the whole spacecraft portion of the film seem far less random and out of place, and teases the next film.
I face an unfortunate complication. That my wand and Potter's share the same core.
You know who. You know who. Otherwise known as He Who Shall Not Be Named, or more blatantly, Lord Voldemort. He's the most powerful dark wizard to ever exist in the Harry Potter universe. He's done some pretty terrible things. So horrible, in fact, that people, both good and evil, are scared of saying his name out loud. Of course, there are a few people who aren't afraid of the name. Fear of a name increases the fear of the thing itself, after all, and Harry Potter has known this for years. He says Voldemort's name quite openly, and always freaks out people who are around him. But perhaps he shouldn't have been so liberal with his defiance of the Dark Lord. Have you noticed that the Death Eaters seem to just conveniently appear around Harry during the events of Deathly Hallows? That's because Voldemort actually put a curse on his own name, highlighting whoever said it to be found. Since no one is exactly saying Voldemort out loud, it allowed the Death Eaters to narrow in on Harry quite easily. Ron informs Harry of this in a deleted scene in part 1 of the Hallows film, a piece of information he overheard from a bloke at the Ministry. It's a cool piece of trivia that explains the cunning of the Death Eaters.
99 target acquired. Repeat. King Kong is dead. Let's go. Get up.
Man 1, Apes 0. War of the Planet of the Apes was a critical and commercial success for 2017 and introduced Woody Harrelson to the series to confront the Ape King Caesar. But where was the Jason Clarke character in this third entry in the reboot prequel trilogy? Clarke's Malcolm was the lead character in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and an ally and friend to Caesar. The apes seem to have a pretty terrible relationship with mankind as a whole, but the few human allies they have can be considered friends in the eyes of the advanced species. So where did Malcolm go? The answer remained unknown in the final cut of the film, but a look in the deleted scenes of the film gives closure to Malcolm's character, or rather, gives us a bleak answer to his whereabouts. When confronted with Harrelson's Colonel, Caesar asks him the whereabouts of Malcolm, a man the Colonel regarded as a remarkable man, who informs a somber Caesar that he shot him. Yikes, talk about cold-blooded. We think this powerful moment should have definitely stayed in the film to give emotional weight to the previous film's actions.
Blah, 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 blah. All of that chit-chat's gonna get you hurt.
Oh, my God.
Literally any cut Joker scene in Suicide Squad. Love it or hate it, Suicide Squad was a pretty popular film, enough so that there's a sequel in active development as we speak. A major part of the first film's marketing, however, was riding on Jared Leto's portrayal of the Joker. The character is one of the most popular and beloved villains of all time and was previously played by Heath Ledger in the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight film. With Leto fresh off an Oscar win, the expectations were high for a lot of Joker mayhem in the Suicide Squad film, but much to everyone's surprise, including Leto, almost all of the Joker scenes were cut from the film. Naturally, that didn't give the film enough time to really dive into this version of the Joker, which left many fans unsatisfied. The deleted scenes cover a lot of the history between Harley Quinn and the Joker, information that would be crucial to the development of Harley's character, seeing as she's presented as one of the anti-heroes of the film. One such scene sees the recently tortured Harley chase after the Joker, declaring her love for the Clown Prince of Crime. We see Harley take on her first kill in this scene, an act she does to impress Mr. J. Leto has stated there were even more cutscenes which further added to Joker's characterization.
You think you could find out what's coming?
I do. Besides this one, there's nothing that can't be explained.
Thor's vision. There's no doubt that Thor's cave scene in Avengers Age of Ultron is considered by many to be really random at best and forced and unnecessary at worst. One of the biggest criticisms Age of Ultron had was setting up too many future events. Not only was it establishing the Infinity Stones in the minds of the Avengers, but also set up the events of Ragnarok, the latest Thor film. In the initial cut, Thor's vision scene in the cave felt pretty tacked on. That's a fair assessment as the studio insisted the scene be part of the feature film. But the scene was stripped of its core components, making it a scene that most fans remember as being pretty choppy. However, there was a lot more footage that was cut from the film that would have made the scene much better. The original scene gave audiences an avalanche of information, all presented in a rushed and choppy montage of exposition. The deleted scene, however, is much slower and keeps the action within the cave, giving us a much clearer and sinister look at the future than what we got in the theatrical cut. We think the deleted version gives us a clearer understanding of both the stones and what they mean to the greater picture, which makes Thor's previous fear vision make even more sense.
Let the armies of Mordor know this. Never again will the land of my people fall into enemy hands!
Whether you like horror movies or not, it's pretty undeniable that they're absolutely huge, with a fan base as wide and passionate as any genre of film. From classics to 1980s gore to bone-chilling modern takes on humanity, we are drawn to the scares that these movies can provide. Some of the best parts, though, never make it to the big screen, and instead wind up on the cutting room floor. Don't forget to hit the red subscribe button to join our notification squad and stay up to date with the latest from Screen Rant. The Fly stars Jeff Goldblum as a man who accidentally crosses his own DNA with that of a fly, and proceeds to turn into a disgusting fly-human hybrid over the course of the movie. One deleted scene showed him desperately trying to understand his situation by putting both a baboon and a cat into his teleportation machine. Unsurprisingly, the creature attacks him and he's forced to bludgeon it to death with a pipe. Test audiences hated the animal cruelty so much, David Cronenberg cut the scene from the final edit. If you're a fan of the horror genre, you're probably a fan of Wes Craven. Best known for A Nightmare on Elm Street, Craven also gave us genre classics like The Hills Have Eyes and The Last House on the Left. The latter movie being so psychologically demanding that while it was in theaters, projectionists took it upon themselves to edit the film before screening them, and cut out scenes that they deemed too disturbing for audiences. Wes has never revealed what those scenes are, but ended up keeping the cuts for the final theatrical version. When Hostel first came out in 2005, it was almost unanimously agreed upon that the movie was gory to the point of being gratuitous. While it has some good writing and directorial ideas, the whole movie pretty much boils down to exploitation for entertainment. Despite its final cut being undeniably brutal, an alternate ending took a bit more of a psychologically disturbing turn, with the protagonist Paxton kidnapping the businessman's daughter in order to use her to get revenge for the deaths of his friends, stripping the movie of any last shred of humanity. Our second Eli Roth entry on this list is actually his first and much better movie, Cabin Fever. Where Hostel is grimy and relentless, Cabin Fever is actually funny, and a fresh, if disgusting, take on the sexy teens at a cabin and the hillbillies that hate them horror movie trope. An alternate ending involving some local police would have taken this movie to the next level. It sees them murder two of the last survivors and set them and the cabin on fire, proving that they've been complicit in the horror the entire time. Paranormal Activity came along in 2007 and thrilled the horror community similar to other low-budget found footage films like The Blair Witch did years earlier. The home security camera style was innovative, exciting, and terrifying. Most don't know that there were actually a few alternate endings made before the director decided on the one that was used. The scariest of these endings sees Katie become possessed by the spirit that haunts her, and finally taking a knife to her own throat. While disturbing, the ending they chose is perfect for one last jump. While Jaws may not seem like a horror movie anymore when included with the extreme violence and gore that we're used to in this day and age, it definitely is. One of the most spine-chilling scenes is the one where young Alex Kintner is first attacked by the shark. And believe it or not, this scene was originally going to be even more graphic. They had intended to actually see the shark come out of the water to devour the boy, but it's probably better left to the imagination. Stigmata came out in 1999 and starred Patricia Arquette as a hairdresser from Pittsburgh who also happened to be an atheist who develops out of nowhere the wounds that Christ had during crucifixion. While this movie is hell-bent on inflicting any and all bodily harm to its protagonist, there was one extremely gruesome scene left out of the final product, in which she slices up her own arm with a knife before stabbing it into her own hand as the priest watches from the sidelines. The Thing is one of those classic 1980s horror movies that is just so over-the-top gross that it was destined to become a cult classic, while making its audiences feel the need to take a long, hot shower afterward. The movie centers around researchers attempting to understand an alien species, and an alternate death of the character Knowles was storyboarded but apparently proved just too expensive to realistically shoot. It involved him getting sucked into the creature while tentacles burst out of him, which in the 80s would have been some impressive CGI. We can't talk about alien horror movies without talking about Alien, the iconic Ridley Scott outer space extravaganza. Almost every scene of this movie is iconic in the horror community, and if it hadn't been cut, this one might have been no different. In the movie, the death of Dallas is presumed after he's attacked by the alien. The deleted scene showed what happened in a little more detail, with Ripley finding his body cocooned by the monster. In order to end his suffering, she takes a flamethrower to him and the creature. A movie titled Cannibal Holocaust is pretty much exactly what you think it is. A quiet indie drama about a family in the 1960s just trying to get by. Wait, no, it's about cannibals. One deleted scene intended to show a man being eaten alive by piranhas. So a dummy was made and meat was strapped to it, but when they lowered it into the tank of real piranhas, they didn't react as expected, and in fact barely reacted at all. The scene was so unscary it was scrapped entirely. The Butterfly Effect was a strange and confusing movie starring Ashton Kutcher as a young man with a mysterious ability to rewind time. His character quickly learns that all of his actions in the past have extreme consequences in the present as everything goes awry. One bizarre deleted scene actually shows him deciding to travel back into his mother's womb in order to strangle himself with his own umbilical cord, ensuring he is never born. And it's no big wonder why they didn't include it in the final cut.
Where am I going? We won't need eyes to see.
It's difficult to imagine much was cut from Event Horizon. Paul W.S. Anderson's visually assaulting movie about a team of astronauts sent out to investigate the reappearance of a ship that had disappeared years before. And yet, according to the visual effects supervisor, even a film this disturbing could have been worse. What is there to say about a Serbian film other than run away? This is widely regarded as one of the most, if not the most, extreme exploitation films ever made, and the things that happen in it are nearly unspeakable. It has been banned in 46 countries, ran for 3 days in Spain, and sparked debates about censorship all over the world. To think that anything was cut from this movie to make it more palatable is almost funny, but over 4 minutes were demanded by censors before they would allow it to be screened. Scream 4 failed to capture the allure of the first film and its slightly lesser sequels, but it definitely tried, with a very self-referential opening featuring a handful of cameos by stars like Anna Paquin. Unfortunately, some believe this opening actually hurt the movie, and the original opening they had planned might have fared better. They shot a more classic two friends watching scary movies before getting taken out by Ghostface opening, which is nothing new, but might have provided a nostalgia that could have helped send the movie off in the right direction. We've already mentioned The Thing earlier on this list, but it's such a sci-fi horror classic that it deserves a second go-around. The film has a pretty ambiguous ending, with the audience left to assume that the alien, MacReady, and Childs are all burnt to a crisp in one fell triumphant swoop. But actually, another ending was shot that didn't tie things up in such a neat package. It showed an infected dog running from the burning building and into the world, but the filmmakers chose the more satisfying, if less open-ended, conclusion. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic, and if you don't know the story of Freddy Krueger, he was burned alive by the town for his crimes against their children, made a pact with a demon, and returned to haunt their dreams. But there was actually more to it. There was a scene where we find out that the children he originally killed were the brothers and sisters of the ones he would go after in the future. While it was cut, leaving in that context would have really upped the tragedy. Most fans of the Friday series regard the fourth installment as one of the best in the franchise, and it definitely boasts the best deleted scene of the bunch. An alternate ending was shot that showed the inside of the log cabin where the final showdown took place, but the morning after. It showed Trish in a dream sequence going upstairs to discover her mother's body floating in a bathtub, and a good jump scare of Jason jumping out of nowhere and murdering her before she wakes up and realizes it was all a dream. 1408 is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel about a man who writes books about haunted houses, but is skeptical of them himself. As research, he rents out a supposedly haunted room in a hotel where dozens of people have died in the last 100 years. His skepticism is put to the test as the room turns out to be the real deal. A deleted scene shows his ex-wife summoned to the hotel and he tries desperately to stop her from entering the room, but it tilts and he is powerless against it. The Cure for Wellness is an almost psychedelic experience, and one that aims to get deep under your skin with its type of horror. In a deleted scene that takes place in the Not-So-Well Wellness Center, we see the protagonist become forcibly submerged in a tank of water that has been oxygenated and forced to breathe in. As he drowns without drowning, he hallucinates wildly images of rituals, cow fetuses, ballerinas that melt, eels, and more. It's an almost beautiful scene, but is also terribly uncomfortable to sit through. No other horror movie of late has had quite the same impact as Hereditary. With bone-chilling horror, unmatched performances from Toni Collette and Alex Wolff, and inspired direction by Ari Aster, Hereditary continues to shock and amaze. But according to Aster, there's even more. The director said that over an hour was cut from the movie and that the Blu-ray will include 9 grisly deleted scenes. What the scenes are remain a mystery, but it's impossible to imagine that they would be any less amazing and traumatizing than what made it into the final cut. Disney classics are classics for a reason. Each one is jam-packed with adventure and features a host of characters that are so lovable we wish we could replace our real friends with them. But what if we told you that the movies we know so well were once very different? That's right, hold on to your hats. Because films go through a bazillion stages before the final cut is greenlit, there are so many lost moments that we never get to see. Join us as we uncover 20 scenes that would have made our Disney classics unrecognizable. Zootopia was the film the animation world was waiting for. Somehow, the movie was able to pull off giving us unforgettable, multi-layered characters, shout out to the gazelle voiced by Shakira, while at the same time providing a much-needed commentary on racial prejudices and power dynamics in America. When Judy Hopps, the first rabbit in the police force, tries to solve a crime, she's met with resistance. While she is an exceptional worker and annoyingly smart, her fellow police peers look down on her as she's smaller than they are. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, spoiler, she defies everyone's expectations. While we love this tale the way it is, this was not always the way the story went. The film's protagonist was originally supposed to be the fox Nick Wilde, which would have changed everything. Just a year before the release, Disney had a change of heart and decided that a message about female empowerment was more pressing. And boy, are we thankful for it. Another idea that got nixed in Zootopia was having the predators wear shock collars while living in Zootopia to keep them in line. If a predator got too excited or angry, they would get shocked, which caused a lot of distress. Being a predator, Nick was drawn wearing his collar, and it was said that his character suffered from depression because of it. The idea made it past storyboarding and even was in the rough animation stage when the filmmakers decided to literally and metaphorically remove the collars. They didn't want to upset young viewers, but still wanted to speak about prejudice. The scene where Nick is shown being muzzled by a group of Cub Scouts he thought were his friends drives this point home. While still disturbing, it's not as horrifying as putting him through physical pain. In 2013, Frozen was released, and it felt as though the whole world was relentlessly playing Let It Go on repeat. Even if you haven't seen the movie, odds are that you've heard someone belting it out from a passing car with total reckless abandon. The film was a total undeniable hit and brought over $1 billion to box offices. We love the movie because it subverted the Disney female protagonist stereotype by making Anna's driving force be for the love of her sister rather than the love for a man. What you might not know, however, is that in the original screenplay, Elsa was supposed to be a villain. There was a scene where Elsa uses her powers to torture two of Hans's guards, which would have made us see her in an entirely new light. After Let It Go was written, the creators decided to make the two women sisters, and we got our happily ever after. Disney's Robin Hood featured a lovable fox fighting for the people of Sherwood Forest. He is the perfect outlaw, stealing from Prince John and spreading the love amongst the needy. To top it all off, we have honky-tonk legend Roger Miller voicing the rooster and lending his perfect songs to the soundtrack. All in all, it's flawless. But it wasn't always this way. During the castle fight sequence, the original idea was for Robin Hood to get wounded and for Prince John to creep after him with a dagger in hand. When Robin Hood thought he was alone with Maid Marian, the prince was going to attempt to finish him off. After testing this on audiences, the creators saw that kids didn't exactly take to this angle. Thankfully, Disney decided to lighten up the ending. When Pixar was workshopping their first film, Toy Story, there was a lot of back and forth about who the main characters should be. As we know, they ended up with Woody, a proud yet sensitive sheriff, and Buzz Lightyear, a brave and sometimes irrational spaceman. The two balanced each other perfectly as they developed an unlikely friendship that won the hearts of millions. Originally, Woody's character was a little different. He was written to be far more cynical and power-hungry. During the scene where Andy's mom says that he's only allowed to take one toy, Woody was written pushing Buzz out of the window in an act of eliminating his competition. The storyboard showed the other toys protesting, then Woody warning them that if they didn't fall in line, the same thing would happen to them. As you can probably imagine, parents and children didn't love this darker tone, and it was scrapped. In The Lion King, the scene where Mufasa falls into the wildebeest stampede is burned into our brains. He's this powerful king who seems undefeatable, and then all at once slips off the cliff and is lost. We don't blame you if after all these years it still makes you all choked up. While you may think that this version is unsettling, wait until you hear its original idea. As we know, Scar has a personal vendetta against Mufasa and wants to take his place as king. In an early draft, he was supposed to snap Mufasa's neck using his own teeth. After some deliberation, the creators thought that this was a wee bit too bloodthirsty, even for Scar. In the film Inside Out, our heroine is a teenager named Riley who is battling her many emotions including joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust. We get a literal insight into what's going on in her head by being introduced to these emotions firsthand and seeing how they navigate a young girl going through puberty. On top of that, she's also moved to a new town and has to start her social life from scratch while battling with her parents. In the end, it has an uplifting message that we must mindfully embrace our emotions, even sadness. In an earlier version of the film, depression, gloom, and despair were also personified. While it may have made for a more realistic portrayal of teenage emotions, we think it could have gotten very dark very fast. We would like to argue that Up is one of the most heart-wrenching movies ever released. If you're not totally sobbing in a fetal position after the first 5 minutes, we're judging you. It follows the tale of an old man named Carl who thinks he's lost everything but discovers that his house can fly, the dogs can talk, and that Boy Scouts aren't as bad as he thought. Despite its beginning, the majority of the film is relatively uplifting, but it wasn't always so. The creators originally had months meeting his end by being chased into a labyrinthian crag and losing his mind, forever trapped. If we could assign an emoji for what we think of this alternate scene, it would be this one. Disney's Mulan is another great example of a film that showcases a dynamic female role model for young children. Coming out in 1998, it was exciting to see a girl break out of gender norms and fight for her family as a soldier. In the hilarious scene where she basically sets her matchmaker on fire, we see she is definitely not cut out to be a housewife. The whole film explores Mulan's relationship with honor and shows us how it can be showed in many non-traditional ways. It takes her single-handedly saving China from invasion for her parents to finally come around to the whole thing. When the script was first written, Mulan's motivations were completely different. She was originally involved in an arranged marriage to Shang and only joined the army to escape her fate. The end of a movie is as important as the beginning. If you leave the theater with a bad taste in your mouth, you are unlikely to recommend the flick to your friends. Directors are terrified of this and therefore work very hard to ensure that their movie ends with a bang. In The Little Mermaid, the movie ends with the sea witch Ursula stealing King Triton's trident, turning into a full-fledged monster and creating a whirlpool big enough to swallow an entire continent. She is up against Eric, who compared to her gargantuan size looks like a shrimp. In the original version of the movie, Ursula was meant to only increase slightly, which would have looked ridiculous. We think that their choice to totally transform Ursula made it incredibly dramatic in the best way. Another big change that The Little Mermaid made has to do with Ursula's character design. As you might know, in an animation studio, it takes a long time for a team to commit to the version of the character that we'll see in the film. There are a million decisions to be made, and they must pick everything from the character's shape of nose to the shade of their hair. The director of the film, John Musker, admitted that it took a while before the creative team made her be half octopus. Early versions of her showed her looking like a lionfish and even being half manta ray. While it's fun to think of the many iterations that could have been, we believe combining her with an octopus was the right choice. That skirt of tentacles is simultaneously mesmerizing and horrifying. We think that Monsters, Inc. was a success because of its unforgettable characters. Sully is just a teddy bear trapped in a monster's body. Mike Wazowski is basically Woody Allen but with one giant eye instead of four. And Boo is the 3-year-old every parent wishes they could swap for their own. Without these characters, the dynamic would have been all wrong. What's crazy is, in the first draft of the film, none of them were written in. In the first incarnation of the script, the story was about an adult man who was being visited by his childhood drawings. All monsters, naturally. Each monster representing something he had to overcome. It was basically a retelling of A Christmas Carol, but fit for every season. We're happy they swapped their Scrooge for Boo. The Incredibles was originally written to be all about the domestic life of the undercover superheroes. Instead of coming out of retirement to save the day, the movie was going to be about the family and how they lived their semi-normal day-to-day lives. There were no car chases, no explosions, and certainly no supervillains looking for revenge. There was a scene that was written where the Incredibles are hosting a neighborhood barbecue and Mr. Incredible accidentally cuts off his fingers and doesn't feel a thing. He has to hide what's happened, meanwhile Elastigirl tries to be incognito and searching for Violet, who's gone invisible. Although this angle would have been amusing, we like how Brad Bird brought it to the next level. The Fox and the Hound is a beautiful movie about predator and prey becoming pals. Overall, its tone is very sweet as Todd the Fox and Copper the Hound must overcome their instincts and surrounding social pressure to be enemies. The film was adapted from a book by Daniel P. Mannix that was a lot darker. In the original tale Chief, the old hunting dog is hit by a train while chasing Todd. In the movie, Chief survives, but he was originally going to die due to the train, and to help justify the rift between Copper and Todd. For the Disney version, the director was originally going to keep this, but decided not to kill off one of the main characters so children wouldn't be upset. Thank dog for that. The Beauty and the Beast is a true Disney classic. When it came out, children rushed to find their knockoff version of Belle's gown, and the movie became so successful that it was even nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. While it is chock full of songs that are almost impossible not to sing along to, there is one musical that didn't make the cut. The song was called Human Again, and it was supposed to be a lengthy 11 minutes of the enchanted objects telling us about their lives before they were cursed. Because it was twice as long as other songs, it had to be cut for time's sake. Lucky for us, in 2002 they added it to the re-release of the film. For those of you who have seen Finding Dory, you know that at the end of the film she is reunited with her parents. For those of you who haven't, we've completely ruined the movie and deeply apologize for our careless behavior. But really, it's your fault because this is a magical movie that must be seen. Another spoiler, this time we warned you. Dory makes friends with Bailey and Hank at the Marine Life Institute in California who find their way to freedom at the end. Originally though, they were written to remain at the Institute. We're thinking the creators must have seen around 10 minutes of that documentary Blackfish and thought against keeping these creatures in captivity. Thankfully, they were set free into the big blue. Coco is about a young boy named Miguel who dreams of becoming a musician, even though his family has banned music. Miguel visits the colorful land of the dead in search of his idols and ancestors. Though there is beautiful Mexican music throughout, to call it a musical would be a stretch. But there was a time in early stages of creation that was the direction they were going to go. The original idea was to have the movie be one big over-the-top song and dance number. While it may have been entertaining, we like that the characters decided to keep it dialed back a bit in order to highlight the folk music. The result, as we know, was glorious. For those of you who have read the book Alice in Wonderland, raise your hand. Because we can't actually see you, we're gonna go ahead and explain why it's much different than the Disney version. First off, Tweedledee and Tweedledum aren't even in it. They're from Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll's other novel. Secondly, it's far more trippy and verges on being very dark indeed. In early development, Disney wanted to be true to the Lewis Carroll original, so they tried integrating parts of the book into the movie. They included a sequence where Alice was executed, and we're not sure how that got greenlit for a kids movie. They thought offing Alice would be a nice little addition to this already grim tale. Thankfully, someone at Disney spoke up and we were all saved from being traumatized. The original Aladdin was perfect. We now live in a world where Disney thinks it's cool to just make old classic animated films into live-action movies, and because of that, we're forced to see Will Smith looking like this. Before this atrocity, the genie was flawless. He didn't look like a blueberry and was the perfect guide for Aladdin. Also, Abu was the perfect sidekick, and Rajah was the most loyal companion a princess could ever have. We're interested to see what they'll do in the live-action version, but are cautiously optimistic. Now, what we recently learned is that the cast in the original Aladdin movie was wildly different at first. Instead of a tiger, Rajah was supposed to be a human handmaiden. Yeah, I know, but what's wilder is that Abu was meant to be an old man. He was supposed to have the same mischievous character, but we guess just not as agile? It would have made for a puzzling combo. If there was an award for Best Grandmother in a Disney movie, hands down every time it would go to Grandma Tala in Moana. People might become annoyed with her because year after year she would win, but she would deserve it every time. In our minds, she's like Meryl Streep at the Oscars. Even though she doesn't get much screen time, she is an integral part of the story and is the reason Moana knows the history of her ancestors and what her true path must be. We were shocked to hear that Grandma Tala wasn't even in the first version of the movie. Originally, Moana had a group of brothers who were meant to be her mentors. While that might have been cool, we would have missed out on the village crazy lady. We hope you enjoyed uncovering those missing parts with us. It's pretty incredible to think that the movies we love and deem as classics could have been completely different had some of those scenes not been scrapped. Did we miss anything? Did Dumbo originally have a twin brother that we didn't know about? Was there a scene in Cinderella where she turned evil? If so, we want to know. On your way out, be sure to slap that subscribe button to ensure you don't get FOMO about our future videos. See you next time.